This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Greetings. All right. Welcome, everybody. Call the meeting to order. We'll start with open time for the public. I don't see anyone guest in the chat area anywhere, so I believe we can continue. Right. First agenda item today is review and approval of previous minutes, which Janet got out right away this time. I'm so excited. Thank you. No, that's not easy with all that's going on in your world. I have to take a moment to compliment and congratulate you all the good stuff going on at COA. And then I'll stop.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about the minutes. Number 4, does it need to say that the vote was unanimous after it says that it was seconded, after the motion was seconded?
Let me just pull them up, Sierra. Okay. I can add that in. Okay, so number which are we on?
Number 4 on property purchase update.
Okay.
At the end, it says it was seconded by S. Simmons, but then it doesn't say what happened after.
Okay.
I missed that. Good shot. Good catch.
So added. Thank you.
And then I also wanted to add that Joy was a big part of presenting the housing bylaw to the select board too. So maybe, I don't know if that she should be added at number 5, like Sierra and Joy and the bylaw committee will present.
I didn't have to stand up. I don't know.
And you were also the one who is forwarding it to, but I guess I was the one who requested that be forwarded, so that's fine.
So I now have S. Simmons, J. Piper, and the bylaw committee will present the proposed affordable housing bylaw. Okay.
Sounds good.
I think at the time I wasn't sure. I was assuming Joy would be, but I'm not sure we pointed it out. So that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of revisionist history here.
That's good.
At least the women are doing it.
Want the record to reflect what happened,
Yeah.
in the sense of who put in the work.
Yeah, I have no other edits to it.
I have none. I think those are good catches, Sierra. Thank you. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I move to approve them. Minutes
As amended.
as amended.
As amended, yes.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor by voice vote, please.
Simmons, aye.
Piper, aye.
Kane, aye.
Sini, aye. We did that so well this time. Can we do that every time? That was
Probably not.
It is unanimous. Well done. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, board capital needs. So a little explanation, admittedly, mostly coming from a place of ignorance. But Joy, as a select board member, I'm hoping you'll provide further enlightenment, but the budgeting process allows for different committees, I guess, to request capital funds on an annual basis. To my knowledge, not to my memory, the Housing Authority has never requested capital funds. I don't know what we would use capital funds for, but I didn't want to assume anything. So I included it on the agenda for discussion and input by members. So that's my brief and unspectacular take on capital funds. But maybe there's something that we could use monies for, and I'm just not aware.
The capital as in cash or capital as in like building?
Large investment, hardware, or whatever. I'm also a member of the capital improvement committee. So
Okay, yeah. So
they're like if the highway department needs a truck, or the fire department needs this, or the police need to replace a vehicle, or the school needs to have its siding replaced, or things like that. So
I think we're probably done.
I can't think of anything from a housing at this moment in time that we would need.
If
But-
we were a larger housing authority and managed properties, then, lawnmowers, trucks, things like that, maybe, but.
Okay.
So do we need a vote to say we don't need any money?
I mean, I think we can just pass the fact that we had a discussion, there was no need for any capital expenditures. I don't know that we have to.
Yeah. We're not voting for something. We're
No.
just, fair enough.
At this time.
Yeah. Who knows what the future brings, right? Years down the road. Right. Next, property purchase update. So I did have a conversation with Mr. Gibson today about the property, and he schooled me on a number of issues, one of which is, and apologies for my overreaction, but it doesn't appear to be anybody's, for lack of a better word, fault, or you can't point a finger as to why, but the property is perked and it's not perked. So apparently it seems like the property was perked, but on the paperwork, it has the address next door. The address next door was considering expansion of their, anyway, without going into all the details.
I'm happy to give an update.
Property should be perked.
I'm happy to give an update from the Board of Health meeting that I just attended,
Okay, please.
because I think that's pretty relevant. So just to give a little bit of history, as you probably all know, and I'll try not to snooze you to death, but prior to going to the town meeting, I went to the health department, requested a copy of the perk for 354 College Highway. I was given the perk because it was noted at 350, but it was outlined exactly as the property that we were looking to purchase. So at the time, there didn't seem to be an issue because it's the same dimensions. It shows it next to 350. It shows 4 perk holes. So I went to them today and said, so it was there wasn't a problem back in April. There seems to be a problem today. How do we resolve this? And they made a motion to basically say it was a clerical error on the paperwork, and it should read 350 for College Highway, not 350, and that they will amend that paperwork to reflect the proper address, and that there are 4 perk holes there in the lower, as we've all seen, I think, prior to this, and that the property is perked, and that the paperwork that I was provided at that time, and went back to double check that, do we need a perk, because it's been since 2009, and I was told by the health department that it did not need a second perk. However, they did agree if we wanted to have a second perk as a housing authority, so we all, whatever, felt it was necessary, that they would waive their $200 fee, but that's the least expensive part of a perk test. I mean, it has it is a high water table, as we talked about way back in probably April. It did pass its perk test. It would probably be a little bit more expensive system, a moderate range system, not really high expensive, not really low expensive, but kind of a mid-range septic system would probably be required because of the 34-inch water table. But it does not, and people were there from Taylor Real Estate, who had spoken to Larry LaCroix, who was the owner at the time, who said at the time that they had it perked, they were actually considering building a house next door for his dad, who was aging. So based on that meeting, my 5 o'clock meeting, it seems like there is a sufficient perk test on file and the address will be corrected. It's also possible at the time that, the planning board assigns numbers to properties, that it could have all been 350 and that 354 got applied at a later date.
Oh, yeah.
So That's also a possibility, but this perk and the diagram that's on this perk is definitely the property that we're looking at.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, it is different news than what I received from Ed. Seems fresher than Ed's news.
That was at as of 5 o'clock this evening.
It's as fresh as you get.
So I mean,
So,
that's what I understood the first time I went there. So, but this is with the whole board. So,
I have a question. I don't know if you folks are able to answer this, but is our local health boards are they the ruling bodies or authorities on septic systems in town? In other words, for example, you have to get a Title V, right, for a septic system. That's a state regulation. Who rules? Who's the authority to say, yes, this is? So for the health, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's an engineer that does that.
Right.
And they have to submit the paperwork to the Board of Health.
The Board of Health. Okay. Okay.
And that's why you go there to find the perk test results.
Okay.
I mean, if we choose, and we do have the funds, if we choose and
Right.
anybody decides that they would feel better getting a second perk, but it wouldn't be the responsibility of the Realtor because the Realtor had this copy of this official perk.
Yeah.
The diagram of the appropriate property. So, if we decide to do that, it would be from probably the CPA funds. And it's not going to, I mean, again, it'd be a lower perk and not a perk. It would probably, it's in the lower part of the property.
Mm-hmm.
So, you see this or not, but.
Actually, I can.
Okay, so this is the perk. This is the frontage. This is
Right.
the drainage. This is the 4 perk holes. So, and then it talks about the rates, which I'm like, huh? So how many minutes it takes to perk and.
Right.
And so it was kind of a mid-range perk. So. So that's my update from my attendance at the Board of Health.
So what I'm hearing is we have the Board of Health, which is the authority in town on this, says that the perk is current enough that it's valid, and they will validate it for that property.
They did make a motion to change the number to 354. Now it is a high, it's not the, I think Southampton in general has a lot of slow perks. So it's like he said, I spoke to a gentleman afterwards who does a lot of septics in town or designs the septics in town, Mr. Searles. And he said that's kind of like a mid-range drainage or whatever the proper term is. So.
Right. So I'm inviting input from members. I have thoughts, but I'd like to start with you folks we have the facts before us. I'll add what I think is a fact before we have a discussion, which is, the seller has come down in the price. We have a budget that was approved essentially from town meeting that in my mind would cover the cost of a perk based on the price coming down for the property. So with that said, what do folks think?
So could you say that again for me as I'm trying to write my notes of what I just said? So I'm sorry, Jim.
That's okay.
I just want to make sure I catch it.
Yeah, it's my belief. I won't say it as fact. It's my belief that given that, at town meeting, purchase of the property was passed at a certain amount, the seller has come down from the asking price, and therefore there's room in the money that was approved by town hall to get a perk, because perks I think are $2 or $3 grand, something like that. my understanding.
Plus, we had other monies in that, not just for the purchase of the property, right? Added into our requested community preservation.
Right.
So
it seems to me, and it sounds like it seems to you, Janet, that there's money available. Is it good use of the taxpayers' money to get a perk? Seems to be the question. What are the pros and cons?
Personally, I don't think it's necessary. If it's already been done, it's been done. It was just a clerical error that made it seem like it hadn't been done. So, I mean, that money, if we don't use it, goes back into the housing budget on the CPA that we can then put into our housing trust. So it's not, I mean, it's free money, but it's not necessarily free money. It could be spent on something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to spend taxpayers' money if we don't have to.
Janet, do you have any thoughts? Or
I'd kind of like to make a motion that we forego an additional perk test at this point in time, and then we can also have a discussion and vote on it if we get a second to the motion.
oh, so you want to have a vote before we continue? You want to end discussion? I'm not clear what you're saying.
No, usually I'll make a motion, somebody will second it, and then we have discussion on the motion. So, and
Okay.
then we can always amend the motion. So we're
Okay.
kind of, if you're okay with that, I'd like to-
Sure.
to
It seems
move
like
forward.
6 one day, half a dozen the other. That's fine. Well, I like that. So is there a second to the motion?
Seconded.
Okay. So we've had some discussion. I'm going to present a counter view, and it's not necessarily my view. It's just playing devil's advocate. This is our first purchase of property with taxpayer monies, and out of an overabundance of caution, this is a 13-year-old perk. And even though the Board of Health says it's legitimate and whatnot, it's in a bit of a high water table, and we might find benefit just to make sure before we purchase the whole property that it really is perkable with a more recent test.
And I would say that the ground doesn't shift. There's probably no changes to the current ground there. That is, the soil is the soil. And, I'm just not sure that, it would just be one unnecessary step. That's just.
Yeah. Any further input? We ready to vote on the motion? Would you read the motion again, Janet, please?
A motion to move forward with the current perk test and forgo a second test.
All in favor with a voice vote?
Aye.
Piper, aye.
Aye.
Sini, aye. It is unanimous.
Who seconded it? I'm sorry.
Sierra.
Thank you.
All right.
And I
Thank
will
you.
vote unanimous afterwards, after the vote.
Correct. I feel like celebrating. This is exciting. All right. But we're going to be all business-like here. We're going to move on to our next agenda item.
Are there any other, Jim, any other property purchase updates, any other due diligence that you're aware of before we?
Right.
No.
No.
Okay.
So do we know what the next step is? Someone's going to just confirm with Ed and be like, we got it.
Right.
We're gonna do this.
And I can do that. I can call Ed, give him the heads up, so he doesn't have to wait for the minutes to be published. Housing trust update. Sierra.
All right. Well, the select board agreed to send it off to legal. They did have one lingering question about who's liable if the housing trust takes on mortgage. But we were recommended by Shelley to ask a lawyer about that anyway. It's a question for legal, so it's going to legal to be checked out, and they're going to ask that question. And then we met again with Shelley and Emma from MHP, and we just talked about, you know, some sort of additional final outreach just to make sure everyone's on board, maybe a little more outreach to the financial finance committee. And we talked about having like an info session. I don't know if Joy or Janet, you'd like to add a little more about that.
Just that they're working on something for us, right? That's
that's right. They're working on, yes, that's what it is. It's like barely,
Yeah,
they're working on like a flyer so we can like share it for info, and we can use that as sort of like the bone structure for what we end up putting in the town meeting articles.
and we talked about if we got it in time, we could put it into the next newsletter for the senior scoop. So it gets out to, because I think the November one is a mailing, but I haven't seen anything from Shelley yet. We also talked about putting a letter to the editor or maybe an article in the reminder as well to reach people. So.
Do you have a point of contact at the reminder?
Ed could probably get one, right?
Okay.
So.
Because they've called a couple times. I think I kept them in my contacts.
Yeah, I've talked to him a couple times on other topics, so.
Yeah.
I guess we're still not certain when or if there's a special town meeting. That's the other question.
Right.
And they also recommended that Virginia speak at the town meeting in favor of it.
Yes.
And that the voice of the chair of the CPC would be important.
Which she will be overjoyed to do. Like, get this money out of our bank account.
Yeah. Nice. We'll take it. So, Sierra, just to clarify, when you say they, I assume you're talking about Shelley and MHP, or when you say they're going to make.
Yes, Shelley and Emma are going to work on a flyer, and they said they'd try to get it to us a couple of weeks after we saw them. So probably, hopefully soon.
Nice. This is another really exciting thing.
Try to get to them too. If you can send her a tickler, Sierra, do you mind just saying, you know, that the newsletter for the senior scoop needs to be, if we could get it by like the 12th or 13th, so we could get it into the insert for the newsletter, that would be great.
What was it called that they were going to make for us? The status of the template for the housing trust flyer.
Yeah, photograph flyer with key points to help promote the trust at the town meeting, including some points from the housing production plan.
Yeah.
Nice. These are significant accomplishments. The property, the housing trust. Further input or comments on the housing trust? Great progress. I have a question. Do you have and maybe you don't, maybe it's too early, but a sense, like a timetable when we start looking at, you know, who's a member on the trust? Because I recollect there's like a select board member, maybe a representative from this body, someone from the community. Do we know, is there the timing?
Well, we have to get it approved by town meeting, right? Or something, or.
So it has to go before town meeting. Boy.
I mean, it's in, I mean, that's why we were looking for the special town meeting. Do you have a copy of the
Right.
trust, Jim, that Sarah sent and Joy sent on to the select board?
Not in front of me.
Okay, I didn't know if we forgot to send it to you.
What was what was the question? What was your question, Jim?
I'm just trying to think of a timetable for when, because I know someone in town, a citizen who I think would be good on this board. But I don't want to reach out too early. That's all.
I think it has to be an approved trust before we start the select board
Yeah.
recruiting.
Yeah, so it'll be after the special town meeting, and then there won't be money in the trust until the May town meeting. So we have, I would say, trying to get these things through to May, and then the select board appoints people. So I don't think that needs to be approved by anyone.
Mhm.
So yeah,
But
I mean, I
people
think
are
it's fair to start outreach and get it on people's mind, just so they can
right.
imagine themselves doing it.
But I assume there's a nomination process if there's someone from the community for the select board to consider.
Usually we have, there's applications, people fill out applications.
Okay.
Send them in.
That seems even more open than a nomination.
Also, don't quote me, but I think everything that gets approved of at special town meeting in regards to bylaws has to go to the attorney general after approval for them to approve too. So I just, not that that's gonna take, I mean, I don't know if that's gonna affect us taking applications, but that I think that's a step that needs to be taken too.
It does ring kind of familiar. It's kind of like a clearinghouse just to confirm that towns are within the boundaries of their authority to.
That's why we send all of the bylaws before our legal before putting them on the warrant.
Mhm.
Because then afterwards they go to the attorney general.
Right. Makes sense.
I think we asked a question of Shelley, is there anything that we should be aware of to look for that might prevent it from being passed? Just to share with you, Jim. And she gave an example of Stoughton failed. There was kind of a couple people that had a really strong negative influence about it passing, and that not to ignore those people, because apparently they kind of poo-pooed it and said, there's just a couple people, but it was obviously not just a couple people. So
we should be aware of the pulse of the town.
right.
Yes.
And not discount anybody's opinion, basically, unless it's on Facebook.
Well, I would hope as a board, we would never discount anyone's opinion, regardless of the topic. But point well taken. Good. All right. Nice work. Are we ready to move on to our next agenda item?
Yep.
All right.
We kind of combined two.
There really don't need to be two things there. The Housing Trust, MHP input update. Janet, thank you. Unless you feel we've missed something.
No, I think Sarah did a great job.
I didn't mean to take over.
No. You can't separate the two. No.
Yeah.
You've taken the lead with MHP anyway, and I'm just. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I know there's those
a lot of other stuff, and so try to help where I can.
I think, full disclosure, my reason for separating those out, because I think there was, there's been some day trainings that I know, Janet, I know you were able to go, and I wasn't sure, Sierra, if you were able to attend. So I just didn't want to miss anything.
I think we post the meetings because all three of us have been there. So we have a housing quorum at there. So Joy was there, Sarah and I was there. So.
Nice. Perfect. Okay. Planning board update. So did join the planning board when their latest meeting to discuss Ken's input on considering bylaw changes. In summary, there's a number of proposals, but what Ken recommended picking the low-lying fruit.
Who's Ken? I'm sorry.
Ken Comia.
Oh, he was there? Okay.
Yeah, he's the
Okay.
consultant for them on these
Okay.
changes.
Okay, it's not Richard Harris. He's not, it's Ken. Okay.
Richard Harris is a
Both of
consultant.
them.
Yes, Richard
Okay.
Harris is. Yeah, and jump in, Joy, because you were.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure planning board got a grant.
Yes, they did.
Yes,
They
that's
did.
why
That's why Ken's there.
Okay.
PVPC, and then they got the ARPA funds for their consultant. So they got 2 pots for
Okay.
Ken and for Richard.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Right. So, the focus was on, and Richard, really added this flavor to it, focus on what is most readily doable that doesn't require so many hoops. So for example, expanding the availability to add, adjunct rooms or whatever to existing buildings, to allow for, dividing a unit or home for duplexes, rather than, the idea of re-looking at zoning is something that is worth exploring, but not as your priority. Your priority should be the easier things, what you see going on in towns around you, what you can do without a lot of expense and investment, both financially and in time, in rewriting bylaws and et cetera. So, I mean, that's a very broad summary, but that, it was good to hear Ken Comia go over. I don't have the details in front of me of what's possible, but basically there was a real flavor among the board. I felt, Sarah and Dan are obviously proponents and supporters of expanding, what options we have available to us. There was some discussion of bigger picture items, like changing frontage requirement, exactly, for example, so that more property can be developed that currently isn't developable. Re-looking at that. But again, Richard really brought us back to, changing what you already have, allowing for, structures to be slightly altered to, right now, I think in one of the bylaws, you can have an additional ancillary unit, but there's a maximum square footage, I think, of 600 feet, and they recommended expanding it to 800 or 900 feet to make it more of a living space. So these are things that can be done relatively easily and quickly. Joy, I don't know if you want to add any details, any impressions you had that are different or in addition to what I'm saying, but
No, I think you covered it.
yeah.
So
There was a lot of discussion. Good discussion.
Yeah, I'm summarizing,
Yeah, I don't have my notes in front of me. I did take notes.
It'd be good to read their minutes when they're published.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's really, the rubber's going to hit the road. But
There's a lot of technical discussion between, because also Ryan Gallagher was there. So he had his perspective coming from a contractor point of view and zoning board, along with Ken and Richard. There was really good discussion. A lot of it went over my head, but that's good.
Well, I think, we're not builders, right, Joy? So it went over our head, but I think what was not lost on me is that a lot of that discussion did start getting in the weeds of details of what's possible.
Yeah.
If you're wearing a lens of, for example, a builder, and I felt that Richard kind of kept bringing people around to a reality of that's fine, but stay with the simple, pick the low-lying fruit first. And I've seen this happen in surrounding towns where they just expanded into areas which currently, for example, a duplex is not allowed. It's now allowed. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be, citizens in town who might resist to that, and that's to be expected. And that's, to some folks, understandable. I'm not saying politically it's easy. I'm saying as far as the logistics, you go with the easier things. And so I felt that Paul, as the chair, heard that, understood it. I felt that Sarah and Dan, as members, were certainly in that wheelhouse. And I felt overall the board, Ryan, et cetera, the board itself was amenable to moving in the direction of how can we take these easy steps to create more housing options in town that will be in the price points at the scale on the, lower end. We talked a little bit, Joy, we talked about big A versus small a affordable, what the difference between that is. So most of the focus was on small a affordable, not necessarily the HUD definition affordable.
So the two bylaws that are kind of like the ones that were on our list, which was the multifamily housing and the inclusionary zoning, were those considered easy, low-hanging fruit to change, or not so much?
Great question. I'm glad you brought up inclusionary, because one of the inclusionary didn't get a lot of talk. It was almost dismissed. And Richard, as I recollect, was pretty, he didn't seem to think that, other towns, there's a lot of inclusionary bylaws out there in other towns, and they don't ever seem to have much of an effect. They either stop.
To change it so it could be more effective.
Well, in your mind and mine, yes. So the number is 10. If we reduce the number to, pick a number, 5, 4.
Right.
Would it Richard's perspective, and I'm paraphrasing and I may be misremembering, is that if you do that, then builders are just gonna, build to 4, or they're not going to build at all. But the bottom line is you're not going to get your affordable housing. Now, I'm not closing off this possibility, Sierra. In my mind, the inclusionary bylaw is still something worthy of discussion and pursuit, with a goal of increasing the affordable housing stock in town. Obviously, that's why we're here. But for the planning board, it didn't seem like there was a lot of utility in pursuing that part of increasing as a means to increase affordable housing in town. In our minds, it is, because it's the one tool we have, and we've implemented, and it hasn't worked.
Getting some of that, like, sorry, we didn't build it, affordable housing money would also be helpful for the housing trust. But what about I know you mentioned the multifamily housing. That one seems like it is low hanging fruit. I mean, honestly, that seems easy, but did they think that was easy or no?
They thought that was not as easy as like a mother-in-law apartment, kind of, but easier.
Excuse me.
Because you can just include it in all parts of town, or you can do an overlay district, which is relatively easy to say in this area, in these areas, we're going to permit it. Looking at, frontage was again discussed, not quite as easy, although I think with an overlay district you could consider. One of the things that I tried to make clear is, as we look at expanding the potential, or the options to build in town by looking at bylaws, is that we don't expand it, that we figure out a way through the bylaw to restrict that added ability to make sure things lean toward the affordable. So, for example, just having smaller frontage, right, doesn't necessarily equate to more affordable units.
Mhm.
You know, if you're following what's happening in the Bay 8 section of Northampton, you see what's happening there. You've got very large, expensive houses just on smaller lots.
Mhm.
So it's my belief, one person's opinion, you know, but from this board's perspective, you know, any change to a bylaw that permits something to be built where it couldn't be built before has to have some kind of language in there to ensure that the result is, you know, housing. That's one way we could do it, for example, is a certain percentage of the AMI.
Yeah.
You know, capital A affordable is no more than 80% of AMI, right? Well, small A affordable might be 120%, 150%.
Yeah.
And so you set up these boundaries, the limits for the builder. You can build here now, but what you build here has to be X percentage.
And how are those, I mean, do those regulations exist in other communities? I mean, do we have
I'm
the
not
right
sure.
to impose that on builders?
It's a good question. I don't know. You know, I would argue, I don't know the answer to that, but I would argue, you know, having a certain number of feet required for frontage could be considered a limitation on builders. So if there's that in a bylaw, you know, the bylaw should reflect in my opinion, the desires of the town, right? Because we live in a capitalist free society, right? But it's not absolutely free. You can't build whatever you want, wherever you want. There are rules, and those rules and regulations usually reflect the town, the desires of the townspeople. I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not a bylaw expert.
Which means it has to pass a town meeting. It'd be interesting who pulls most people at a town meeting.
Right. And I think if the planning board proposes to change the bylaws in the very simplest ways, you know, to allow for, you know, a mother-in-law apartment or whatever, that would have to go before town meeting too. Sure. So
Now, if these larger issues don't get addressed in this round, do you think maybe in the future years we could apply for another of those grants that I'm forgetting what they're called right now, DLTA grant, and have it be like a housing focused bylaw review? Because like, it's not like he's really working for our purposes. He's working for the purposes of every bylaw in the town, which is there's a lot of them to compete for this. Do you think we could try to get him again just to work on housing stuff later?
Well, that's why we have Ken, right?
Right. I think we could, if we still have questions after what Ken's doing right now, because Ken is presenting. I mean, you're right, Sierra. It's not strictly I don't believe, an affordable. He's giving, well, it's through that lens.
Yeah, because they have Richard for the rest of the bylaws. I think Ken is strictly for housing.
Oh, is he really? Okay.
I thought so.
Well, I would say even if we still have questions, and we, for example, my question is, can we create a bylaw that has these, you know, requirements to build and that level of detail, and we need consultation on it? I would say, why not?
So was it
so I'm sorry, Janet, but Ken's report might lead to, like any scientific investigation, right? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know until you have further questions. I'm sorry, Janet.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you either. So the easy ones first. Did that come from Ken or did that come from Richard? I'm confused. Who's doing what?
Mostly from both, I would say, but mostly Richard was my sense.
But Ken is focused more on housing bylaws, but Richard, I'm just trying to grasp what they're.
Yeah.
So from my observations from the planning board, Richard's been working on all of the bylaws, and he said, hold off on housing because that is a whole other beast. And you want to get all these other bylaws kind of just passed through because it's really just things that need to be caught up and rectified and corrected and codified. Let's get through all that and then focus on the housing, because that's kind of more controversial. And I think then that's also why they went for the grant to have Ken come and look at the housing bylaws, because the goal is by the end of working with Richard and Ken to have something to go with to the town meeting in regards to housing.
Okay. And is May their time frame, or is it a year from May?
I don't know if they have a time frame. I think they're just working on it. I don't know if they have a time frame.
I think they're shooting for May, at least for some of these. Again, you may have recommendations, for example, from Ken, and Richard, endorses or whatever. But some of those recommendations might be, we'll explore this further. Or my sense is, when Richard was saying go for the low lying fruit, this is something that's pretty easy. You can get it in for the next town meeting. That I don't want to quote him because, I didn't take notes during that meeting. I'm going on memory. I think reading the minutes will be helpful. But in summary, that's
recording too.
I'm sorry.
Did they record it? Do you know? Was it being recorded?
I believe so.
So even better.
Okay, good.
I would say, from 30,000 feet, it was an optimistic discussion. And there seemed to be consensus, maybe is a strong word, but a sense that this is doable and the board is going to pursue it. Planning board, that is. Sounds
good.
Yeah. Is that a fair characterization, Joy? Just in your sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is good. There's a lot of positive things happening here. A lot of work by folks. If there's no further planning board update questions, we'll move on. Okay, new member recruitment.
I thought we had somebody, Sierra.
Dan was supposed to join us today, but I guess he couldn't make it. But Dan LaValle does want to join the housing authority.
Dan was supposed to join. I am going to see him tomorrow, so I will tell him.
Whoa.
But I'm so shook that he didn't join.
Calling him out here in a recorded meeting.
This is recorded. I'm calling him.
It's really no rush because he can't even become. I still don't understand how I became an appointed member, even though the Attorney General never got back to me. But so he could become an appointee, but he may have to wait till election day.
He'll have to wait till election, right?
Yeah. So it's like, whatever. He can come to any meeting in the next few months and then join us. But at least that's awesome and hopeful, right? Get another person on here.
Yes. But as it stands right now, I'm planning to rotate off come May or June, whenever my term expires. So we'll need another person, even with Dan. So we should continue recruiting. That's what I'm saying.
Somebody appointed by the state.
That's Sierra, I thought. No?
No, Sierra was
I
not.
tried to get appointed, but I haven't been elected this year. But initially, before election day, when I first joined, I tried to get appointed by the state, submitted my stuff. They never answered me, but then I still somehow got appointed by the town.
But you were not elected?
No, it's not an elected. No, were you elected? You were on the
I
ballot.
was elected, but I was made a voting member like 2 months before by being appointed by the town somehow. I don't know how that works. I don't understand.
You were
but I was elected this May.
Ding.
Or maybe it was last May. How long has it been? It was, yeah.
So we could use, so bottom line, a state appointed member.
Yeah.
Okay.
If the state were to ever answer.
And is that a 2-year term for the state, or is it?
I don't think it's any different than the other ones.
No. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know that for a fact, but I would have gone for that if I'd known that.
Don't answer you. The state does not answer.
Yeah.
I know, they ignored us.
I will pursue clarification when I talk to Ed about the.
And if the state doesn't follow up, can we still just appoint somebody in the interim? That's
what I think happened to me initially.
Yeah, it's one thing to be appointed. You think they'd be happy to follow up since they're begging us to have someone on there appointed by them.
Yeah, to be fair, it was like early to mid pandemic. And so maybe everything was just in chaos in the state level.
Mm-hmm.
Dan did not remember it was tonight.
Okay, we forgive him. There's this thing called a
Mark
calendar.
Mark that in the minutes.
Thing.
Okay, so I will talk to Ed about proceeding with the purchase. I will ask him about state appointed position. And is it 2 years or not? Okay, good. Right. We have any item that cannot wait until next meeting. I love that standing item. Just in case you're at the edge of your seats. All right. Let's schedule our next meeting.
November 7th?
Can we do the 14th or the 28th? The 14th.
I think we're going to try to do the second, right? But
I think we were, right?
the 14th, yeah,
14th works for me.
because the second Monday in this month is a holiday, so town hall was closed, so the 14th is good for me.
Yeah, I thought we were switching to the second Monday anyway.
Yeah, that's what we were saying. Yep.
Yeah.
Got it.
November 14th should be good. All right. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Don't all scream at once.
Kane, I.
Piper, aye.
Tim's eye.
Feeny aye. That one's always unanimous. And you guys, we did a really good job doing that again,
Yeah.
perfecting this.
All right. I'm off to another meeting. Good night, everyone.
Good luck.
Sorry, Joy.
Thank you.
Take care, Joy. Thank you.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.